Happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day.
Earth Day is next week. It's time to get hysterical about global warming.
It is overwhelming, the science, overwhelming.
This is a huge, huge planetary crisis.
Are you worried about global warming?
Of course I am. We're not going to be able to survive in the same way.
What should we do about it?
I'm not sure.
It can be as simple as riding the bus or the subway to work.
Well, I do that. Or this.
Oh, I'm such a good citizen, riding my bike to work. I'm gonna save the earth.
But we need to get a sense of priority.
How much wealth are we going to forego creating in order to have zero discernible effect on the environment?
A practical Earth Day. That's our show tonight.
And now, John Stossel.
Tuesday's Earth Day. This is a holiday that brings out stupidity in people. We will hear all kinds of bizarre things this week, some on this program. The premise is noble. We all want to protect the environment, but there's this religious-like satisfaction some people get by thinking that they can save the planet from man's extravagance. You get a taste of that in the new movie Noah's Ark.
My father said that one day, if man continued in his ways, the Creator would annihilate this world.
I misspoke. It's just called Noah. It's about Noah's Ark. But that's the kind of stuff that's been happening, I hear. Environmental annihilation is coming because we've been evil. We pollute, we frack, we burn oil, cut down trees, overconsume. But cheer up, we can still save ourselves. We face a fork in the road.
Two futures stand before us. We can continue on our current path, where we rely on outdated electricity grids, inefficient buildings, and dirty power plants that contaminate our air. Or we can change. We can create greener cities where solar panels and wind turbines power our homes. Here's the thing. This cleaner, more sustainable future is within our grasp.
It's within our grasp. Greener cities with solar panels and wind power. Our president has a plan, too. He says,
we can break our dependence on oil with biofuels and become the first country to have 1 million electric vehicles on the road by 2050.
Whoopee, and they all applaud, but oops, by 2015, that's next year, and America doesn't even have 1/10 that many electric vehicles. To put it in perspective, this is what we've got versus the president's prediction. And even if we reached his goal, it wouldn't have had any real effect on climate change. Most Americans, including our politicians, aren't very good with numbers. They're even worse with science. So let's turn to two specialists, one who's right and one who's wrong. No, I'm not being fair, but now you know where I stand. James Taylor studies environmental policy at the Heartland Institute. Paul Goulet is president of the environmental group Riverkeepers. So, Paul, how am I getting it wrong?
All you want to do is deny the problem. That's not very American, John. You need to solve problems in America. We're here to solve problems, not to deny them.
And the problem is climate change.
The problem is giving our kids and their kids a planet we'll be happy to give them and that they'll be happy to live on, giving them a better standard of life than our parents gave us. These are old-fashioned values, and you as a conservative should be embracing them, not ridiculing them.
Well, just for clarity, I don't call myself a conservative. I call myself a libertarian. Big difference. I don't want to police the bedroom.
I'm sure there is. I'm sure there is. I'm learning that now.
But don't you want to preserve the planet for your children?
Absolutely, we all do. But our current path, as we saw in the clip, what is the current path? It's a sound path. According to EPA, we've reduced air emissions 70% since 1980, and the trend keeps going down. So we're doing a great job.
Yeah, let's be clear on that. When people hear this crisis about greenhouse gases, they think the air is getting dirtier. But you both agree that as far as the bad stuff we inhale, the particulates, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, that stuff has gone down.
Clean water and clean air laws work. We have to keep making them work because the Clean Water Act, we were supposed to be done. All the rivers were supposed to be fishable and swimmable. Anybody out there in your nation fish or swim or boat? I think so. Only half the rivers that we were supposed to clean up have been cleaned up. Let's finish the job.
And Riverkeeper has helped make that happen and cooperating with government, passing laws. But they are getting cleaner, right? There's been delay in some of the treatment, but it's moving in the cleaner direction. I can fish and swim in the rivers right next to New York City.
You can sometimes, but when it rains, you end up with so much pollution that you can't do that. So we've been cutting that pollution slowly but surely. But you know what happened since the 80s, since the libertarian movement really took wing? We stopped spending on infrastructure. That's not the values that I grew up with when I looked at my dad, and he was a Republican committeeman, and he said, you invest in your community. He talked about the greatest generation. We don't talk about the greatest generation anymore, James, because we don't emulate them.
We're not investing in our community.
Well, Paul talks about spending. I talk about results. If we see our environment getting cleaner, then why are we saying we're not spending enough? Why are we measuring progress by how much money and power we're giving to government? I want to see results, and I'm seeing results. EPA is seeing results. That's even more important.
You know, the government of the state of New York has just worked with the city of Albany to cooperatively get them to spend $140 million that'll take their water quality in the Hudson from the worst to first. Let's finish the job. It's a proven set of laws. Let's not ridicule
the worst.
The progress.
I can drink this practically unfiltered.
Oh, I'm going to send you right up to Albany after a rainstorm and watch you drink it, John. That will not be fun for either of us, but maybe your viewers will get a kick out of it.
Riverkeeper's website says there's only one sustainable option: smart energy, and that's wind, solar power, biomass, biofuels, geothermal, hydropower. What's wrong with this argument?
Well, as I already mentioned, we see that pollution is already declining. Why do we need to have, say, wind power, wind turbines, which require 600 square miles of land development to replace a single conventional power plant? Especially when the costs are so much higher, this takes money away from other key environmental issues, as well as health issues, as well as housing, etc.
What's wrong with solar power?
Solar power, the same thing. It's very land intensive. It's also very water intensive. Solar thermal power, which is the least expensive form of solar, that requires 2 to 4 times more water than conventional energy. And where are we producing solar power? In the deserts, where we need this water.
You know, the biggest growth in solar energy is on rooftops. It's what they call a disruptive development, in which the old style of generating power and then sending it through transmission lines in people's communities is less and less important. You had 30% of the power created in 2013 was solar. Same thing with wind.
And I put them on my roof. I have them in my rooftop.
Bless you for that.
It's great.
You are a good
heats
guy.
the water. But I only put them there because the idiot state of Massachusetts throws money at me to subsidize my putting them there. Poor people who can't afford to buy a house
for every
have
dollar
to pay for it.
Of subsidy of the wind and solar and energy efficiency, there's $13 of subsidy for fossil fuel. You know, you can buy a big old
James,
SUV.
I got to let you answer.
You can buy a
that
big old SUV, and you can get a huge tax credit relative to the tax deduction you get for a little old hybrid.
According to the Congressional Budget Office, when we're talking kilowatt hour for kilowatt hour subsidies, wind power, solar power receive 10 times as many subsidies as natural gas, 50 times as many subsidies as coal power. When he talks about these extra subsidies, it's merely because conventional energy is more efficient, more effective, and it has far greater market share than wind and solar. He wants to talk about aggregate, but he doesn't want to talk about per kilowatt hour.
You want more subsidies for oil and coal?
Kill them all, John. Kill them all.
All subsidies.
Well, you know, that's an interesting one. That one we can agree on. Listen, I want a transition. I want a transition that is smart, sensible, and gets us where we need to go. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I want a price on carbon, but I want one that's done in a revenue-neutral fashion. And I want to know why Republicans, I realize I'm with the libertarians now, Republicans have walked back from their own baby. Cap and trade was their baby. In 1990, the first Bush administration came up with that, and that's one of the reasons why the air is cleaner.
Carbon tax would be better. But, Paul, it appears that as far as the public's concerned, your side has won the debate, because when I interviewed people on the street, most everyone said they were worried about global warming, and they talked about wind power and solar power.
Solar power, definitely.
Solar. It's cleaner.
We're a big fan of wind in the UK, and we have a lot of wind.
James, you've lost.
I think people are concerned because they hear so much in the media. But when you prioritize, when you ask people, what are you most concerned about? What do you want politicians to deal with? Well, global warming comes in dead last. So I think in that case, we have some hope, John. We're not going to sentence ourselves to economic deprivation based upon these false global warming
You're not worried
fears.
about global warming?
Not at all. Not at all. What we see right now, temperatures that rose during the 20th century, just a little bit, about 1 degree. Can't even tell the difference. It's 43 degrees outside right now in late April in New York City.
Yeah, well, that means
you can't
nothing.
Tell the
That's
difference.
New York City.
But what we're looking at is a very small amount of warming that's been beneficial. And when we look at the past 6, 7, 8,000 years, far better context, we're still much cooler than the long-term average. Whenever we hear this mantra about, well, it's the hottest decade on record, what they define on record is merely the past 100 or so years since the Little Ice Age ended. In a long-term context, in a more appropriate context, we're actually quite cool.
So here's what your president says about skepticism like yours that dismiss the promise of renewable energy.
Some of these folks want to dismiss the promise of solar power and wind power and fuel-efficient cars. In fact, they make jokes about it. These guys were around when Columbus set sail. They'd be charter members of the Flat Earth Society.
I got to respond to something James said before. The idea that global warming, climate change is good for you. Let's go down to the Jersey Shore. Let's go out to the Rockaways and tell folks who lost their homes in Hurricane Sandy, which James believes would have been worse if not for
Let's compare the number of hurricanes now versus 30, 40, 50 years ago. No, it's not what I have to say. It's absolute objective facts. The number of hurricanes, the severity of hurricanes is declining. You want people to believe there's never been a hurricane before. We've seen many more hurricanes like Hurricane Sandy. Hurricane Sandy was Category 2 at its strongest. When you look at Category 3, 4, and 5 hurricanes, they used to strike the New York City area on a fairly regular basis. If you go back to the early 20th century, we saw major categories coming up the East Coast frequently. You don't see that anymore.
You know, it used to be these guys at Heartland said it's a hoax. Now they say we don't have to worry about it, and now they say it's good for you. I really wish they'd pick a story and stick with it.
Just to be clear, you're saying in some cases it's good because more carbon dioxide means good for plant growth.
We look at crops, we see crop increases, we see crop production increasing, we see declining number and severity of tornadoes, we see a declining number and severity of hurricanes.
Right. But there is bad
Any
stuff
way you
too,
measure,
and there are
thrive in warmer temperatures.
And when he says Heartland, that's Heartland Institute where you work. There is bad stuff that might happen. Serious scientists are worried.
Might happen if we have the type of warming that is not going to happen for many centuries, because we've been there before. We were there 1,000 years ago during the medieval warm period. We were there 2,000 years ago during the Roman warm period. And whenever temperatures have been warming, humans have fared better.
Because his side uses faith-based science. They published a paper a couple of weeks ago. If you look at the citations in their executive summary, there's 20 citations. 11 of them are 30 years old or more. 6 more of them were created by the people who wrote the paper. Most of them
we're getting into wonky territory
that's
here.
okay. I'm happy to get
Let me tell you the difference between faith-based science and true science. He is faith-based because he looks at these computer projections, these models that are programmed.
Yeah, that's serious science.
I'm quoting real-world facts, real-world data from today, stuff that we're able to measure and prove. He says, well, but we program these computer models to say this. That is faith-based science.
You pay your scientists. We don't pay ours. Our science is peer-reviewed.
You work for free?
Listen,
on that note, thank you both, Paul Gallet and James Taylor. You're not the singer,
but I can sing.
But don't.
Well,
keep the conversation going on Facebook or Twitter. Use that hashtag there, Earth Day. Let people know what you think. Now, a few people I interviewed were utterly skeptical about global warming. Is the globe warming?
I don't think so.
It's not?
Don't buy it.
Significant minority of people say that. The globe isn't warming. I won't go that far. The Earth has warmed, though not for the past 17 years, but we are in a warming trend, and we're putting lots of carbon dioxide into the air, record amounts, and many serious climatologists are concerned. So what do we do about that? That's next.
The end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as...
What up? Jaden Smith here, and I got one word for you. Trees. We need to get to work. When our movie comes out, you'll see what happens if we don't start taking care of our world.
That was Jaden Smith, son of the famous actor Will Smith. Their movie came out shortly after the last Earth Day and pretty much sank without much notice. Good, because I'm so sick of the hype about our dying planet and how all of us must pay more for an electric car or something. It's just mindless anti-scientific propaganda. We've heard it since the first Earth Day. Here's how CBS hyped that.
The heavens reek, the waters below are foul. We are in a crisis, of survival.
This is a CBS News special. Earth Day, a question of survival.
Somehow we've survived since that Earth Day, and although I never heard it from Walter Cronkite, most of life got better. Some of it got better because we passed environmental rules and got the filth out of the air and the sewage out of the water. That was good. But now we're told that we're in big trouble because of greenhouse gases. And sadly, most people I interviewed in Washington, D.C. believed that.
We're not going to be able to survive in the same way that we have been all this time.
We're not going to survive? Please, odds are we will not only survive, but life will get better. Even left-wing environmentalist Bjorn Lomborg, who says global warming is a real problem, says industrialization will make things better. Industrialization? How?
Well, fundamentally, look, if you're poor, you have bad air, you have bad water, and you die very soon.
You have bad air because you may burn dung to heat your hut.
Exactly. Almost 3 billion people, so almost half the world's population live with air pollution that kills 4.3 million people each year. It's the world's biggest environmental problem, the World Health Organization just told us a couple of weeks ago. Yet that's never what we talk about. We talk a lot about global warming, and now, it is a real problem. It's something we need to fix. But we need to get a sense of priority. By far the most important thing is air pollution, indoor and outdoor air pollution, and that's about getting people out of poverty.
And America has reduced its greenhouse gas emissions in spite of government. Fracking, which a lot of governments forbid.
Yes. Surprisingly, the amazing numbers that most people haven't heard is if you take all the solar panels and all the wind turbines in the world, which we spend about $60 billion supporting each year, they have cut less CO2 than what U.S. fracking has managed to do globally. So you've done more for the global environment than all solar and wind. And that's worth pondering because we're paying $60 billion for the privilege of having those solar and wind panels. You guys are making about $100 billion on fracking. That's a much better deal.
But our government pushes stuff like electric cars, and even if we did reach the goal that they've had about 1 million electric cars by 2015, next year, unlikely.
Not going to happen.
And that will cost $7 billion? How much would that delay global warming?
It would be infinitesimal. You probably wouldn't even be able to.
By 1 hour, according to the environmentalist calculation.
If you do the calculation, it's 1 hour. And fundamentally what that tells you is that this is a symbolic act.
But today in the environmental movement, and among the general public, when I talk to people on the street, there's this attitude that if it's industry, it's bad, it's going to make things worse. Now this new IPCC report makes it sound like we're all going to die. Los Angeles Times headline, crop yields are down, deaths from heat are up. New York Times, the worst is yet to come. But more carbon dioxide is good for plants, and the price of food, by and large, has gone down because of industry.
Absolutely. I mean, these are very misleading reports. Now, again, there is a problem, and CO2 in the long run will probably make growth rates and yields slightly lower. But what you have to remember is they're still going to keep going up. We're still going to be able to produce more and more food, and what they're telling us is we'll be able to produce slightly less more and more food because of global warming. Not the worst is yet to come. Yes, global warming is probably going to cost in the order of 2% of GDP.
Says you.
Well, yes, that's the IPCC report by the second half of the century. But remember, that's 1 year of loss.
We can afford
growth.
that. We can adjust to that.
It's not the end of the world. It's a problem. It's one of those many problems that we will fix, and mostly by making sure that people stop being poor. Remember, people worry, for instance, a lot about hurricanes, and that's a whole other conversation. But remember, if a hurricane hits a rich area like Florida, there's lots of damage, but fundamentally, people survive. But if it hits a poor country like Guatemala, it wipes out 10,000 people, and it costs about a third of their economy. So it's about getting people out of the poverty trap and making sure that they get rich. Then they'll be much better off.
And free markets do that. Thank you, Bjorn Lomborg. Coming up, more on Earth Day, and we'll argue about nuclear power. And one of my guests says worrying about climate change is racism against people. Nothing like a clean glass of water. And I got this right out of the New York City tap. It's pretty pure, despite millions of people flushing right around here. Getting most of the filth out of the water is one of the few good things government's done. And it was the first Earth Day protest years ago that helped make that happen. So good for the environmentalists, good for the government. But like all things with government, their rules grow and never stop. 15 years ago, the environmental regulators could have said, stick a fork in it. It's done. We're going home now. But the regulators never do that. They always do more. And when they do, they run over people. People like California farmer John Duarte. He joins us now with his lawyer, Tony Francois of the Pacific Legal Foundation. So what'd they do to you?
Hello, John. Thanks for having us on. They told us we couldn't farm our ground. They gave us a cease and desist order with no due process and told us we couldn't farm our land.
Because?
Because they presumed we had stepped into some wetlands and other areas that we shouldn't be farming and that we don't even want to farm.
And you did buy some land that had some wetlands on it, and you planted some wheat, but you avoided the wetlands.
We flagged them, we mapped them, we went around them, we didn't touch them.
Not just because you're not supposed to, but because...
I don't want my tractor to get stuck. I don't want to farm wetland soil. And I don't want to break the law. These are sensitive habitats, and we're completely willing to stay out of them.
So, Tony, take it from there.
Well, John, what happened in this case, as John mentioned, is that the Corps of Engineers, which is an agency of the federal government, issued Mr. Duarte and his company a cease and desist order, which basically prevents them from farming their property. So they've done this on a completely erroneous version of the
facts. They never
facts.
looked at the property, they just assumed he must have? Or
Their order is based, in their own words, on available information, and despite our requests for what they base it on, they have never told us.
Now, wetlands are important. The Army Corps of Engineers says this is habitat for fish and wildlife, flood protection, water quality improvement.
Yes, they are. They are important, they are protected, and we stayed out of them. And if we'd have had the opportunity to explain exactly what our practices were before we planted any wheat, we could have solved this ahead of all these troubles.
So what's this about?
It's about due process. The example.
What's in their heads?
We can't tell you that. I can tell you that what's in our heads is we want to farm property sensibly. We want to farm it sustainably. We know the public is demanding that farming be done in a sustainable way. We know that consumers want their food produced by sustainable farming operations. We're game. We're happy to play ball. But there has to be a reasonable process for the regulators to oversee that.
And Tony, the Pacific Legal Foundation sees lots of these cases. The bureaucrats always want more power. Or they mean well, I assume, but they always have to do more.
Well, I characterize the average bureaucrat as like that fellow you know that just has to be on the Homeowners Association so that they can enforce the rules. And the Corps of Engineers is that guy. In this case, you know, although these are technically described as wetlands, it's important for people to understand this is not the Everglades. These are small, maybe the size of this table, depressions in the ground that hold water for a few months a year. So this is the Corps going well beyond their charge to protect navigable waters into rolling grassland hills looking for wet spots, and then using false facts and no process to deprive people of their property.
Because they're mean? Because they're crazy? Why?
This is very similar to if you went home today and the police had barricaded off the front door of your home and said to you, cease and desist, you cannot use your home. You've violated some laws. And you were to have your attorney send them a letter back and say, please tell me exactly what laws we violated. And then you received another letter with no answer to your original question of what did I do from the enforcement prosecutor in the local county. I mean, when we asked what we actually did, they kicked it up to the enforcement branch of the Army Corps in Sacramento. And still to this day, haven't told us why we can't use our property.
What's this cost you?
It's cost us 2 years of farming the property. We would like to develop the property into permanent crops, probably walnuts, which would be a very high value operation. It would involve probably $4 million in investment into Tehama County, where the property lies. Tehama's got an 11% unemployment rate.
And this is one of the reasons why. Thank you, Tony. And John next. A founder of Greenpeace wants you to die. I'll confront him about that when we come back. There's one ample form of energy that produces no greenhouse gas, and that's nuclear power. But when we asked people about it, most recoiled.
It's scary. Wow. It's just, nuclear energy is the worst.
He must be right, the worst, because I saw Jane Fonda and Jack Lemmon in that movie, The China Syndrome.
Jesus Christ. Well, they're behind it, give me God damn it.
10 million until the court.
Operations.
This is Jack Goodell. We have a serious condition. You get everybody into safety areas and make sure that they stay there.
The China Syndrome title referred to the movie's claim that the nuclear plant meltdown was going to burrow through the earth all the way to China. And then came 3 Mile Island.
Something happened to the power station's cooling system, and radioactive steam was released inside the plant. It is also leaking through the thick walls of the plant into the air.
Oh my goodness. And after that, there was the Chernobyl nuclear plant explosion in Russia, which killed 1 million people. And most recently in Japan, Fukushima.
Smoke is pouring out of nuclear reactor number 4 at Fukushima. They are still at the mercy of the winds and which way radiation gets carried.
But it turned out that that scare and the others were exaggerated. No one died from Fukushima or 3 Mile Island. No one was even hurt. And I lied about Chernobyl. I said 1 million died. Did you even catch that? Bet you accepted it. 56 people did die, but not 1 million, and most died fighting the fire. People are so scared of radiation that they'll believe just about anything. Patrick Moore, a co-founder of Greenpeace, used to fear nuclear power. You once called nuclear energy synonymous with nuclear holocaust. Yes? What?
Yeah, it's enough to make me cringe today. We were fighting against nuclear war and the threat of nuclear war, John, and I think the mistake we made, and I was a serious science student, we believed that radiation was bad and that anything that had to do with radiation should go. And today, when I think about that, the fact that nuclear medicine is such an important part of medicine, diagnosing and treating millions of people with high-level radiation and doing it for good, and nuclear energy, which is the safest form of of energy we have. I mean, the statistics are there. The Chernobyl is the only nuclear accident that did cause mortality. And it was a style of reactor that should never have been built. The Soviets took a shortcut during the Cold War and built about 25 of these all around the former Soviet Union. We're lucky that only one of them blew up because the design was flawed, fundamentally flawed, so that it could blow up. And that's what happened with the Chernobyl reactor. The World Health Organization says 56 deaths can be attributed to it, and there is no discernible health effect in the hundreds of thousands of people that were evacuated eventually after being exposed to quite high levels of radiation, way higher than at Fukushima. And 3 Mile Island, there wasn't really any exposure to speak of.
It's not as risky as people think. And now you say, let's build nuclear plants in America. Well, and this is why I joked about you want people to die.
If the environmental movement had recognized back then that nuclear energy was far superior to using coal for our large continuous power plants, there'd be more nuclear plants today. There's over 100 already in the United States that are running every day, but there might be 300 or 400 now. And whereas we're getting over half of our electricity from coal, it's going down a bit now because gas is from the fracking. Gas is coming in to replace it. But there's no doubt that worldwide, if the environmental movement had embraced nuclear energy, we would have far less coal power and far less deaths from coal mining and from the air pollution that it causes.
I hear if there are more nuclear plants, we're subject to terrorism. The fuel can be stolen, made into nuclear bombs?
The fuel can't be made into nuclear bombs, and you try and steal nuclear fuel out of a nuclear plant, that is not going to be very easy. The fact that no terrorist has ever targeted a nuclear plant is one piece of evidence about why it isn't very likely. Terrorists prefer subways and shopping centers and political targets and financial targets. They have never made any effort to go into a nuclear plant.
The fuel can't be made into a bomb? It's different?
No, it's totally different. The fuel in a nuclear reactor is enriched to about 3% or 4% uranium-235, whereas bomb-grade fuel has to be enriched up to 90%. It's two totally different things.
All right. I'm sold. I've always believed. I'm appalled that even NASA doesn't tell the public it's nuclear fuel in those rockets because they're afraid people won't like it. But if it's so good, why does nuclear power need all these government subsidies? Get the government out of it. It's the Price-Anderson Act limited the nuclear industry's liability for accidents. The Energy Policy Act, $13 billion in subsidies. George Bush, $20 billion in nuclear loan guarantees. Get off the dole.
The loan guarantees are not a subsidy. They are basically saying that they are taking a risk to some extent on the part of the public.
So is any business.
But the public needs to be involved in the production of our energy supply. I mean, they're the ones who are going to be benefiting from getting the energy. If we want nuclear energy,
I benefit from my BlackBerry. I admit I still have one of these. Nobody's subsidized.
There'll be subsidies somewhere in that chain. But the point is the loan guarantees are not giving money. There's no money being given to anybody. They're basically guaranteeing the project. So it makes it less expensive to borrow the money, which in nuclear it takes like 5 years to build a plant, and all that money has to be spent. Billions of dollars have to be spent before a nickel comes out of it.
We will have to continue that discussion. Thank you, Patrick Moore. Next, if you celebrate Earth Day, does that make you racist? My guest says yes. Have you been to a UN Earth Summit lately? I hope not, because here's a sample of the artwork seen there. That's the Earth on the left with the thermometer in its mouth. Why is Earth sick? The doctor says, you have humans. Humans. We apparently are now a disease. Alex Epstein of the Center for Industrial Progress, a group that celebrates human progress, says the environmental movement practices a form of racism. Racism against the human race. Really? What do you mean?
Yeah, so let's think about this kind of graphic, because it's sort of an extreme graphic, but you hear this all the time. I've heard Stephen Hawking say, imagine if like the sun or God or whomever, saw the earth and what we've done to it, and what would they think of us? They think we've ruined it. And that's the exact opposite of what my view would be. If I'm an alien and I'm looking at the earth, what I say about humans is not they're unnatural. I'd say, wow, they build the best nests. Those guys are amazing. They've done such a good job making the earth good for them. And we have. So why can't we see that? And my view is...
because it's not natural.
Right. So why don't we consider human beings natural? We're part of nature. Why do we exclude us? So that's what I call human racism. For some reason, non-human is good and human is bad.
People burn coal. Birds don't. Bears don't.
It's too bad for the birds and the bears. They're not good enough to burn coal. They don't have a mind. We have a mind.
They're not destroying the earth. We are.
So if you talk about good or bad, destroying or constructing, it's from the perspective of someone. If we're talking about the perspective of a human being, burning coal is amazing. We have an Earth that can now hold 7 billion people. It couldn't do that before, so one of us would have to go, or everyone in the studio practically would have to go. So thank man for coal.
Right. And here's examples of the anti-human, as you say, racist attitude. The Sierra Club, fighting climate change with family planning. In other words, have fewer children for the earth. The Telegraph, David Attenborough, the big broadcaster, environmentalist, humans are a plague on earth. Prince Philip, former president of the World Wildlife Fund, I hadn't realized that. I'm tempted to ask for the reincarnation of a particularly deadly virus.
Yeah, so when the key is when they talk about the earth, they don't mean the earth for humans, they mean the earth, saving the earth from humans. And I believe we need to improve the earth for humans. And if you think that the idea of calling us a cancer is horrible, no, we're the ones who cure cancer.
But we cause global warming?
Yeah, we cause a lot of things. So every species survives by transforming the world around him. Sometimes you accomplish what you want. Sometimes you have a side effect. And so at worst, it would be a side effect. But what we found is that the side effect is not that bad. But the effect of burning all this coal is we have the safest climate in history because we can build such a durable and comfortable civilization. And if you care about the poor people around the world, you better let them build fossil fuels so that they can be safe from climate too.
You give an example using the Grand Canyon to show how the different groups think.
Yeah, so this idea of, environmentalists, they just want to enjoy the earth, that's what they care about. BS. Because if you are against oil, how are you going to get to the Grand Canyon? People used to not be able to move around at all. I've been to the Grand Canyon. I've been lucky enough to go a lot of places. That's because of oil. That's because of technology. That's because we've improved the earth. That's what they call a cancer. I call that great.
And they appreciate it because it's beautiful and no people should be around, you say.
And historically, there were even people there, so the whole thing is a scam. But no, they think the Grand Canyon should exist and no one should see it, and we should just be able to contemplate the landscape in our yard while we're borderline starving to death. That's the vision. That's a primitive life. I want a life where I can enjoy nature and enjoy the man-made.
And it's the same philosophy but behind the hatred of GMO foods, genetically modified organisms, which can save lots of lives.
Exactly. So there's no evidence these are harmful. There's all the evidence that they're helpful. But the reason they're opposed is because they're man-made. And man-made means mind-made, and it means made deliberately for man. Nature doesn't make stuff for us. It's neutral toward us.
It's not just man-made. It's just that maybe it'll change the food to kill us and there'll be a mutation.
Well, it's deliberately made to help us. So man-made is, again, it's using the mind to benefit human life. If you're against man-made, you're against the mind, and you're against human life.
Racist against the human race.
Yes, racist against.
You get pushback when you try to.
We as a race have low self-esteem, and it's time for human self-esteem.
And your weird T-shirt says.
This is one form of human self-esteem. I love nuclear too. I love a lot of things.
Show it. I love
fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are a way of improving the planet around us. Doesn't mean it always goes right, but overall, it's amazing. And so we should love the Earth we've made on Earth Day, or we can call it Man Day.
Let's call it Man and Earth Day. Thank you, Alex Epstein. Next, we heard one glimmer of hope, good news when talking to people about Earth Day, from a child. I'll show you why I think this girl should run for president after the break. This Earth Day, it's time to ask, what are people thinking? Are they thinking at all?
The temperatures are changing now because of, I guess, the ozone layer.
Global warming pretty much just ruins everything around the world.
Too much hairspray in the 80s.
She, at least, I think, was joking. But most everyone told us they want to stop climate change. And then when I asked them how, they're not so clear. They look for rituals that make them feel cleansed.
Make actions, even in their own home.
Which action?
Things like, everything from being more conscious of how, what they're throwing away and how they're recycling.
If we recycle more, will that affect climate change?
I think it will start.
Every little bit counts.
Set up recycling bins, I guess.
Recycle. We're going to recycle everything.
And if he and everybody in America recycled, would that affect climate change?
Definitely. I force him and he tries to throw things away, when I'm not looking. But I pick through the trash.
Sometimes I'm like, you know what? I'm going to throw this away just because I know I can.
On principle.
I mean, more people, I think, should be walking, bike riding.
That wouldn't change my life much. That's how I get to work. But it won't make a dent in climate change. And why should everyone have to live the way I do? Also, most everyone I interviewed talked about recycling, as you heard. Recycling has almost nothing to do with climate change. It might reduce our need for landfills, but there's no shortage of space for landfills. Most of what we heard was just meaningless environmental feel-good blather. And then government acts on it. They pass laws requiring pointless changes to our lives. Because once you decide nature's good and moral, the reasons to restrict human activity are endless. Some environmentalists won't be satisfied until our carbon footprint's zero. Of course, that would require abolishing civilization, but if our impact on nature is so evil, abolishing us wouldn't be so bad. The group Earth First did once have the slogan, "Back to the Pleistocene." Now, most of us don't think civilization is evil. We work hard to keep it going and make it better. But we worry so much about what environmentalists say, most of us passively submit to green demands. We don't have time to do the complex calculations about economic trade-offs. It's easier to just recycle something. But the Earth won't notice. Rarely do people think about climate change in terms of costs as well as benefits. When we asked people about their preferred source of power, they were almost unanimous.
Solar power, definitely.
Solar. It's cleaner. Solar energy, without a doubt.
Really? Even though it's much more expensive and takes up vast areas of land for solar panels, and it only produces power sometimes? We want it because it makes us feel good. But at last, some good news. Sometimes I see a glimmer of hope, someone who gets it despite all the propaganda that surrounds her, even from her own mom. One who has enough wisdom so that when we ask about the best source of power, we get one sensible answer.
I think solar power. I definitely think we need to explore solar power.
I think oil. We need to explore it.
Yes, we do need to explore for oil, because at the moment, fossil fuels like oil are all that stand between us and poverty. I can't wait for that girl to run for president. That's our show. See you next week.